National Association of Software and Services Companies, Nasscom successfully hosted the 29th edition of its flagship event, the Nasscom Technology and Leadership Forum 2021. The forum was hosted virtually for the first time and was focused on the overarching theme, shaping the future towards a better normal. The event aims to achieve three key objectives: celebrating technology, which has served as a backbone to boost businesses during the crisis, drawing a roadmap towards building a hyper-digital future, and bringing out the importance of trust and responsible technology in this hyper-virtual world. At the three-day event, industry and business leaders shared their thought and perspective on the way forward for the Indian businesses. Tiger Tyagarajan, CEO, Genpact LLC, and Nitin Paranjpe, COO, Unilever, delved deep into the increased focus on remote working and workplace modernization.
It is a unique environment we've been living in for the last now almost 12 months. And I guess the perfect place to start the conversation is, what does this mean for the future of work, for the future of business, for the future of what all of us do and you and I have been doing for so many years? How do you think about that?
It's an interesting question, which I think would have occupied all our minds over the last year or so, as we've been faced with wholly unprecedented times. I think there are two aspects to this question, the way I see it. One is the future of work, and the second might be the future of the workplace. Yeah. And I think it's good to draw a distinction between the two. I think the future of work is something that people have been talking about well before the pandemic.
Right.
I think as a consequence of the way technology has been spreading, AI, automation, etc., there are so many reports which basically say that most of the jobs which exist today won't exist in this form. Not in the too distant future. In the next 5 or 10 years, more than half the jobs which you're doing today won't exist. And that poses significant challenges to all of us. And we as a company are thinking hard as to what do we do? What do we do with our teams, with our people, when we can't necessarily guarantee people employment, but how do we make sure that they're employable? So skilling, reskilling is a huge agenda at this moment, and I can talk about that a little later. Which the pandemic has brought to the fore is really the future of the workplace. I don't know whether I'm overreaching myself when I say that it is very, very unlikely that a mandatory 5 days in the office is ever going to come back again. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think it ever will. And as we have over the last 9 months, 12 months, looked at what's going on, talked to our people, carried out plenty of surveys to assess how people feel. What do they want to do now that we've all experienced that it is possible to work differently? Yeah. Now I think across countries, across places, we find that most people would like to be back in office 2 to 3 days a week. I don't think anyone would be there 5 days a week. I'm exaggerating when I say anyone. Very, very few people would like to do that and need to do that. But equally, I don't think anyone can or should be working from home all the time. Because while we may be managed in the spirit, I think there is something to be said about social capital and culture, etc., which requires us to get together from time to time. Not 5 days, but maybe 2 to 3 days. And I think in that context, we've also been thinking hard and experimenting boldly, I might say, and it could go wrong and we will come back, but we've also been thinking whether the future might even be a 4-day work week. So, New Zealand, at this moment, we have just launched an experiment to see whether a 4-day work week is at all practical. And when we did that, as you can imagine, the obvious sort of issues, concerns, all the reasons why it might be a terrible thing to do was what was brought up by people. But as we think back, we realize that when I joined the organization, when I started working, a 6-day work week was the norm. Right. Today we think of that as the norm. We think of a 5-day work week. In fact, if you go back longer, just around the Industrial Revolution, a 7-day work week was the norm.
That's right.
And a 6-day work week and a 5-day work week. But it's not inconceivable over the next decade or so. Who knows? People choose a different work-life balance. Technology supports a 4-day work week might become a norm. So I don't know. There are many, many areas, but the one thing is certain. The future of work and the future of the workplace will not be what it has been in the past.
Wow. There is so much there, Nitin, that can be unpacked, and we should do that. But I just had one interesting reaction in terms of a memory that came back when you said that when you joined the workforce, it was a 6-day work week. I joined my first job in what ultimately became a part of Unilever. So I joined Ponds India in sales. And the biggest victory for me was when I told my dad that the company that I'm going to work for is a 5.5-day work week.
And it's interesting that having worked for Unilever in this period and in India where we were working for 5 days, I had seen the joys of 5 days. If someone had come and offered me in my early days a slightly better salary and a better package and said, but you have to come to work for 6 days a week, maybe I would not have. I think I started valuing those 2 days. That doesn't mean I didn't work on those 2 days, but it was at my time, my call, my choice. As different from being asked to come and required to come. And I suspect in the world of tomorrow, there are many people who will start thinking differently about work and life choices and balances that people make. And so we have to become alive to that and start seeing what works, what doesn't work. And if you need it to work, what are the changes we might need to make in our processes, in our culture, in the other systems around to allow that to become a reality.
Yeah. Actually, everything that you said, Nitin, is the way we think about the reaction to the question of work of the future. And I thought you're unpacking it into the way work gets done and where it gets done as two different topics. Obviously, they have interplays with each other. And then it has a big, flow-through impact on, therefore, what does it do to talent? Therefore, what does it do to skilling? And therefore, what does it do to the use of technology? The amazing thing that I think the world has discovered in the last 12 months is all the technologies that we are using for the way we work today have been available. Nothing has been reinvented in the last 12 months. It's just that the acceleration of embracing it has got compressed by, I don't know, whatever number of years. And the realization that actually you can do it this way, that's an amazing learning.
Sure, the biggest learning that I got through this pandemic was the realization that I, and probably each one of us, have lived our lives with so many self-limiting beliefs.
Right.
So, if at the start of the pandemic, before it started, if someone had suggested to me that we could all be sitting at home and we could be running our businesses, we would be running our S&OP processes, we could be driving we could be setting up new units which are coming up, suppliers, partners, we would do all of this sitting at home. I would say, are you mad? I've been around in this business for 30 years and that's not possible. That would have been my reaction. Yeah. And it required a crisis. It required all of us to be forced into abandoning what we were doing in the past and not voluntarily, but being forced into exploring a different possibility. And that, the act of doing that just opened our minds. And the question and now I realize that much of it could be done. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can forever run business in this manner, but it does mean that it doesn't have to be run the way it was running in the past. That is absolutely clear. And therefore the question in my mind is, what other self-limiting beliefs I might still be carrying?
Yeah.
How can I become open enough not to wait for the next crisis to allow for newer possibilities? Because like you rightly said, the technology existed, but we simply didn't choose to leverage it the way we are doing it.
So on that note, thank you very much, Nitin, for joining this conversation. I'll end by saying more exciting future than at least I have ever seen in the industry that I've been in.
Oh, 100% right. At times I regret the fact that I'm closer to ending my career than starting it. But that's the excitement of everyone getting into the workforce today.
Thank you very much, Nitin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Keshav Murugesh, Group CEO, WNS, and Paula Goldman, Chief Ethical and Humane Officer at Salesforce, discuss the crux of ethics in technology and how it can gain the trust of the users.
So my first one is, it's a really interesting office at Salesforce that you lead. The Office of Ethics and Humane Use. Now, how was this actually conceived? What really is the scope of your vision for this role? What gives you happiness or gratification in terms of your performance metrics for this role? And when you were actually offered this role, how did you overcome that thought that maybe this could be a superfluous role?
Sorry, maybe this could be a what?
A superfluous role in this world today.
Yeah. Well, I'll take your questions in order. So about the founding of the office. So Salesforce has always been a values-driven company from the very start. Led a lot of work around defining what philanthropy looks like for tech companies, and so on and so forth. And I think we believe that ethics can be a business differentiator, and we approach it with a spirit of humility because we certainly do not have all the answers. And in fact, oftentimes it's more about asking the question than having the definitive answer. But we hope that by sharing what we're learning, we can help technology companies move forward together. And what I will say is that the world today looks very different than, Salesforce was founded in 1999. The speed of innovation around technology has no doubt delivered extremely positive outcomes and opportunities. And the potential for technology is to make human beings better, right? Is to open up opportunities for us to better our own lives. But at the same time, as I said, there's all these issues that are now in the forefront that maybe people did not predict, like bias and artificial intelligence, like privacy, and what is we call kind of a growing techlash. That is to say, the scrutiny on technology companies as some of the biggest companies in the global economy. And that is why Salesforce started the Office of Ethical and Humane Use in 2018, and is also why we focus on what we call ethics by design. And that is the incorporation of ethical principles into the process of designing, building, and shipping our software and services. And it's also why we, as the Office of Ethical and Humane Use, have developed a robust process along with our technology and product teams to evaluate the way in which our products and services are used. So that's about the founding. You also asked about kind of the gratification and you said it more politely, but it was kind of like, why was I crazy enough to take this job? So in terms of the gratification, it's really about cultural transformation. And kind of at the end of the day, I work on a lot of very technical issues and projects, but I see my highest and best goal at Salesforce is to reinforce a culture where everyone owns ethics and where everyone's thinking about the potential unintended consequences of the products that they're building and thinking really critically about, sometimes the answer for what the best path is not clear. And it requires really thinking through various angles on an issue. And so, we are slowly but steadily seeing more and more people coming to us with the questions rather than us coming to them, right? And that's what you want. You want everyone to own it. And you want everyone to feel comfortable, not only that they won't, say, be punished for bringing up these issues, but in fact that it's actually their responsibility to bring up these issues. And I would say in terms of why I took the job and kind of what some of the bigger misconceptions are on the job, I would say I took the job because it's such a big challenge, right? I love going into spaces where, where the path forward is not defined and you're kind of creating a blueprint, borrowing from wisdom of others, but trying to create a path forward. And I would say in terms of misconceptions, it's really about preparing for the unexpected. And this is, I think this is probably very similar in the world of technology security, or actually in a lot of domains right now, given the turbulence of the world. You're never prepared. You have to have sort of frameworks and processes, and you have to guess what's going to happen. But the truth is that the world events every week kind of throw us on our heels, and we have to recalibrate the decisions we've made in light of new information all the time, which is challenging, and it's also fun.
Very interesting. By itself, technology does not have context or ethics. At best, it's a value-creating intermediary between the user and the environment that the user works in. Trust, on the other hand, is highly dependent on understanding the context that we are surrounded by. Today, we find an erosion in public trust for businesses, particularly for technology companies, despite all the value that they have been creating. How do you think companies can rebuild this trust through their engagement? And what, according to you, in culture and leadership, helps organizations transition from legally compliant to more ethically compliant? And what do you see as common roadblocks on that path to progress?
That's such a good question. And yes, I agree that we are definitely in a crisis of trust. That crisis of trust is global, and that crisis of trust is not just technology companies, although I think that is a very big focus. But it's also, with science, with companies writ large, with basically any institution, and it's deeply important that we address this crisis of trust, because the solutions to our big problems as society, across the board, depend on trust, right? So how to rebuild? I really think it comes down to two things. The first is listening. Listening is deeply important. And so, for example, within Salesforce, our office is constantly testing new ways to listen at scale. So we have office hours. We create listening sessions with employees. Sometimes we will, hire an outside person to come in and facilitate, and we won't even be in the room. And we'll say, like, hey, we're going to gather you. We want your thoughts on a particular topic. We're going to anonymize the results. We just want to listen. We want to make sure you're super comfortable, sharing without any fear that it's attributed to you whatsoever, right? We just want the honest perception. Sometimes or very often, I should say, we bring in communities that we think might be impacted or have a stake in the technology that we're developing. And that is, we do that in two ways. The most important way is we try to make our employee base as diverse as possible and as representative of the communities that we're serving, right? So that we're actually listening to all those perspectives, by design as we're building our products. But we also we also consult the organizations representing these groups as well in the development of our products and in the development of policy around our products. So I could not say more. Listening, I think, is the absolute foundation. The second is about transparency, and that's also really, really important. And I think there's kind of a growing public disease about, I should say, how technologies are created and for example, what data is this technology gathering? And so, for example, last year when the COVID pandemic hit, we created a number of technology responses to it. We created a product called Work.com, which helps businesses reopen safely, and it has things like a wellness check that helps people, attest to being well enough to go back to work, that kind of thing. And we worked very, very carefully with those product teams, not only to minimize the data that was being collected in that technology, but also to be super transparent, right, about, so if you're a user and you go through that flow, you know exactly what data is being collected and by whom and for how long. It's that kind of thing. It's that level of transparency that I think can turn the tide. Because, look, these issues are super complicated. By definition, they're super messy. And there isn't always a single right answer. But the more that that companies can demonstrate active listening, that they're really open to lots of perspectives, and that they're actively including those perspectives in the decision making very seriously, and that they're sharing, like, look, this is exactly what this is exactly what happened, and this is exactly how we've designed something. It may not be perfect, but it goes a long, long way to rebuilding trust.
Well, thank you, Paula, for those really far-reaching views on how we can harness the power of technology while also keeping it responsible and ethical.